And 65 days ago, I'd have told you that it was mathematically impossible for a year to last a decade. But of course, that was before 2020 came to town. You don't need me to tell you, but I'll tell you anyway. This has been a year of stress and upheaval unparalleled in modern times. We have endured a pandemic whose death toll is spiraling north of 250,000 in the United States alone. We have spent months locked indoors or else walking the streets masked up and looking like bank robbers from some old Western movie. Speaking of which, movie theaters are failing, as are clothing stores, restaurants, booksellers, and pretty much every other business that depends on people to be able to get out and patronize them. In 2020, basketball was played in near empty gyms and baseball in near empty stadiums. Addictions rose, and we had to learn how to socialize, teach, and worship virtually. We also had to learn how to give speeches virtually. Nor is that the only challenge that this year has brought. We've seen flooding and fires on a catastrophic level. When I went to Los Angeles this past summer, the sky was a sickly yellow and the air smelled like a backyard barbecue. Meantime, so many Atlantic storms are pummeling the Americas that they've literally run out of names and are now referring to them by letters of the Greek alphabet. In 2020, we have seen celebrated young men die with a suddenness that took your breath away. Kobe Bryant and his young daughter and 7 other passengers on an ill-fated helicopter ride. Chadwick Boseman, the action movie star, turned out to have been fighting a fatal illness. And I haven't even mentioned Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, who spent 8 minutes and 46 seconds pressed to the street with a policeman's knee against his neck, crying for his mother, crying that he couldn't breathe, and finally dying right there before our very eyes. Nor have I mentioned the uprising that those deaths ignited, the weeks of protest and resistance that gripped this country from Portland to Kansas City to Los Angeles to Washington to New York, to say nothing of sympathetic demonstrations in major world cities like Rome, London, Madrid, and Rio de Janeiro. Nor have I mentioned the violent and dystopian response to those protests in this country, most notably in the nation's capital, where nonviolent demonstrators were gassed and were beaten. And now, here we are, in the home stretch of this bizarre year that feels as if it has lasted 10 years, and I have the honor of being asked to address you on the theme, This Moment in History, Racial Equity and Cultural Diversity. Well, with your permission, and with apologies to the late, great Ben E. King, I want to remix that a bit. I want to spend some time talking about this tragic moment. Truth is, it's not just that 2020 has shaken us, but rather that it has ripped us out of comfort zones, forced us to question things we once thought we knew. 2020 has been the difference between a thing you know intellectually and a thing you know viscerally, know with a certainty your bones can testify to. 2020 has made things real. I mean, we all knew that life is uncertain and nothing is promised, but that Sunday when I heard that Kobe had died healthy and young at the age of 41 was like getting hit in the face with a brick you never saw coming. We all know that our planet is overheating, but gazing into that egg yolk colored sky in Los Angeles, watching those storms one after the other pummel the Atlantic coast, made you feel like a future of fire, flood, hunger, and desolation were breathing down your neck. And we all know that race remains the great open wound of the American psyche, but watching George Floyd die as that police officer looked out from that grisly work with entitled unconcern made it not something happening on the news, but something personal, something that in a very real sense happened to each one of us. Seeing him die made it an emergency. This tragic moment has awakened something in this nation, some sense of conscience and activism that had been asleep within us. And as the year closes itself out, as we prepare for whatever it is that 2021 has in store, here's the question that we as people of conscience should be asking ourselves. It is the same question Martin Luther King asked the year before his assassination. Where do we go from here? It's important, I think, to realize that if 2020 has ripped us out of comfort zones, if it has forced us to ask questions we never thought we'd have to ask before, maybe in a sense that's not the worst thing in the world. If it has reminded us the next day is not promised, maybe that lends this day an urgency it never had before. If it has reminded us of an inconvenient truth we allowed to fester for far too long, maybe that should in turn remind us that problems left unattended do not simply solve themselves. And if it has brought us tragedy and pain, maybe in the context of MCCJ's mission of building an inclusive community, it has also left us the gift of opportunity. And here I'm thinking about that Target store in Minneapolis that was looted and burned after the murder of George Floyd. It turns out that the store, located in the middle of a poor African-American neighborhood on the south side of town, was not the bright and clean Target that suburban shoppers are used to. No, this one was notorious for being dirty and poorly stocked. It was such a mess that it was known locally as Targetto. Well, in the rubble of that ruined store, Target saw what I hope we see in the rubble of this ruinous year, meaning an opportunity, a chance to do better. The company met with members of the community to hear their concerns. It hired a construction firm owned by a Black woman. It improved the lighting, spruced up the entrance with a new mural and with plants. It changed the stock in its grocery and beauty aisles to better reflect the taste of its customers. It organized a racial justice committee whose job was to, quote, create environments where Black guests feel overtly welcome. The new store opened just a few days ago, and Target has committed itself to similar outreach to customers in other communities of color. Now, none of this is to paint the Target Corporation as a racial savior. No, the point here is that when things are torn down, you have two options. You can either weep in the rubble of what was, or you can use the rubble as a clean slate, a chance to build something bigger and better. That's what Target did in its store. That's also what Stacey Abrams did. 2 years ago, she stood in the rubble of her political hopes, a run for the governorship of Georgia shattered by voter suppression. And she built on that rubble a voter registration movement that helped turn that state, that red state, bright blue, and secure victory for President-elect Joe Biden. One thing about standing in the rubble is that everything that was has been cleared away. You can see further, your view unhampered by existing structures and presumptions. You have a blank sheet of paper to work on. What you do with that is limited only by your imagination and your will. It turns out it always has been. The United States of America represents the most flawless ideal, not the most flawless country, but the most flawless ideal by which human beings have ever sought to govern themselves. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As a model of human rights, as a means of unleashing the maximum of human potential, you cannot improve on that. And granted, if America had ever been serious about its ideals, there would be no need for an MCCJ, and you and I would be spending this moment doing something else entirely. If America had ever been serious about its ideals, it would have been a nation of inclusion and community right from the start, where land was never stolen from the native peoples. Chinese immigrants were never relegated to California shanty towns. Jews were never banned from housing. The Irish were never forced to do dirty jobs for minimal pay. LGBTQ people were never beaten or arrested for the crime of being. South American children were never caged and taken away from their parents, and Africans were never segregated, lynched, and enslaved. As Dr. King said in his final speech, all we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper, which America never has been. But in this tragic moment, this moment pregnant with possibility, this moment when we are reckoning with a frankness we haven't seen in 60 years, with our failures to live up to our founding ideals, who can say what is and is not possible? Who's to say that we cannot make great strides toward building inclusion and diversity into the very fabric of whatever takes shape from here? Who's to say we can't, as Newark did, remold police departments so that they protect struggling communities instead of just suppressing them? Who's to say that we can't, like the Eastlake Foundation of Atlanta did, revitalize blighted places so that incomes and test scores rise even as crime falls? Who's to say that we can't, as the Gay Straight Alliance has done, lower depression and suicide rates among LGBTQ young people? Who's to say we can't, as the Dallas Dinner Table has done, facilitate cross-cultural friendships and connections through the simple act of breaking bread? Who's to say we can't, especially in this fraught moment when we are standing in the rubble of an awful year, make real and substantial change? And you may say, well, yes, those are wonderful successes, but they are specific to the programs and the municipalities that you mentioned. And I would say, who says they are? This is the thing I've never understood, this failure of imagination among those of us who say we want to fight for change. Why can't what Newark did work in Minneapolis or Ferguson? Why can't what Eastlake has done in Atlanta be replicated in Miami or Los Angeles? If gay straight alliance principles help kids in New Orleans and Washington, why can't they help kids in Cleveland or Las Vegas? The point being, we already know how to build diversity and inclusion. We already know how to shape a culture more welcoming and affirming than the one we have. The examples are literally all around us. The problem is that we allow them to be the exception and not the rule. We don't lack know-how. What we lack too often is the will, the vision, the belief. But in this tragic moment, when everything is up in the air and we're all waiting to see what happens next, in this moment when all possibilities seem equal, why not go ahead and change the world? Why not at least try? And yes, I'm aware of how daunting that sounds. I'm aware of how easy it is to talk yourself out of trying to make change, how seductive it is to say, what can I do? I'm only one person. Well, for the record, Cesar Chavez was only one. Barry Gordy Jr. was only one. Steve Jobs was only one. Elvis Presley was only one. The man who faced down those tanks in Tiananmen Square was only one. Rosa Parks was only one. Only one can change the world, but first you have to believe, you have to know the world can be changed. And have you ever noticed, people who are committed to paths of bigotry and division never have to be convinced of that. They never seem to doubt their ability to change the world. Yet, for some reason, people who are committed to diversity and inclusion always do. Good always seems to need a pep talk. Evil never does. So fine, here is a pep talk. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. Dr. King said that. Surely in the light of history, it is more intelligent to hope rather than to fear, to try rather than not to try. For one thing we know beyond all doubt, never has anything been achieved by the person who says it can't be done. Eleanor Roosevelt said that. Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. Bishop Desmond Tutu said that. They tried to bury us. They did not know we were seeds. The Greek poet Dinos Christianopoulos said that. I say this, 2020 is almost done. We stand in the rubble of this tragic moment, yes, but we stand. So much of the denial that has challenged and obstructed us has been cleared away. You can see further, your view unhampered by existing structures and presumptions. The slate is clean. The paper is blank and white. So what happens next? What do we do now? Where do we go from here? Well, the answer is up to us, each and every one.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh yeah, I see skies of blue, clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying how do you do. They're really saying I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful